have you with us. Okay, so I'm going to introduce our panelists for you. So myself, I'm the Business Transformation Manager here at CIMSPA. I've been with the company just over 18 months, but I've been in the sector for about 14 years, from starting out as a personal trainer through to setting up my own facility and being very much involved in training and education. We've also got Danielle Peel, who is also with us from CIMSPA. I have to make some comment about the picture. So in the image, she is blonde, but when we speak with Danny, she's a slightly different colour. So she's not a chameleon, yeah, it is very much the same person. Danny is the head of organisation design and development at CIMSPA, where she builds the foundations for CIMSPA's future areas of work and leads the team to achieve best possible practice and governance in its day-to-day operations. Danny's previous area of work include creating the system for producing professional standards, redesigning CIMSPA's governance structure, and reforming the Institute's Royal Charter and Statutes. So Danny, great to have you on board this session. And I believe, certainly for the last sort of 18 months, it's your first webinar appearance for a little while.
It is my first webinar appearance since I've changed hair colour, I think is probably a good example.
Brilliant. And Danny was very much at the heart of this policy, and she'll be sharing with us and very much kind of laying the foundations for where it came from and how it's been developed and how we can move it forwards as well. We've also got Sue Wilkie from EMD UK. Hello, Sue. How are you doing?
Good, thank you very much.
So Sue is Head of Instructor Development at EMD UK, which is the national governing body for group exercise. Sue has over 30 years of fitness industry experience, from teaching and presenting to managing training companies. Most recently, she's worked directly with DCMS on the Group Exercise Return to Play Guidelines, a document used by over 9,500 instructors. So brilliant to have you with us, Sue, and you were very much involved in the development of this policy. So really looking forward to hearing from you in a short while. We've also got Chris Foster from UK Active. So Chris is Head of Learning and Development over there at UK Active and a long-standing member of the CIMSPA Professional Development Board. He's worked in the sector for over 16 years and maintains a keen interest in health and well-being as a personal trainer and nutritionist. So quite a unique perspective, I suppose, you've got, Chris, in terms of sort of working within UK Active in learning and development, but also being a practicing practitioner yourself as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It's something that I think we're all passionate about. The reason we're in the industry is to help individuals, and it's 16 years on from entering the sector as a fitness instructor and working my way through a range of roles at Nuffield Health and then now at UK Active. It's something that I'm still maintaining that passion for, Phil. So I think it's good to keep your finger on the pulse and keep close to what's happening, and hopefully that's played a key role in supporting the development of this policy.
Brilliant. Thank you, Chris. And again, great to have you with us today. And then we've also got Andy Goulbourne. Hello, Andy. Hope you're well.
Yeah, Phil. Hi. Good to see you.
So Andy is the Divisional Director, Sport, Recreation and Equine at Howden UK Group Ltd. So Andy has worked with major clients in the world of sport and entertainment for over 13 years, providing them with risk management guidance and bespoke insurance solutions to support all levels of activity. Through the design and implementation of award-winning digital risk management solutions, Andy has successfully helped clients manage their insurance costs while simultaneously addressing their duty of care responsibilities. So it's great to have that sort of input from an insurance perspective, and I know that insurance was a key part to the development of the policy as well. So really looking forward to hearing from yourself.
Yeah, no, thanks for inviting us along. It's really great to be here, and it's the panel, the whole discussion that came along with creating the policy. There was lots of different facets to it, and it's good to have an insurance input. I can't claim to have any kind of fitness input whatsoever at all. That's not my bag, I'm afraid. I'm not quite got the physique for it, but it's good to be able to contribute.
Brilliant. No, thank you very much, Andy. And finally, but absolutely not least, we've also got Paul Thomas. So hello, Paul. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Phil. Good afternoon, everybody.
So Paul is Global Head of Sport and Leisure at AXA XL, the speciality risk division of AXA, who are the world's largest property and casualty insurer. So AXA XL provide a range of product solutions for sporting individuals, instructors, coaches, groups, clubs, entities, associations and federations, both in the UK and overseas as well. So again, providing that insurance perspective, which is a critical part to us being able to deliver safely online. So really good to have you all on board. So almost there with the introductions and the housekeeping and and getting started. So the format of this session, so I'm handing over in just a moment to Danny, who's going to speak a little bit around the purpose. So what the policy is about, what it intends to deliver, and what the policy and the guidance actually include, how it's going to be reviewed. So obviously we've got the first iteration out there, it's been published, it's live, but in a world where things move quickly, it's important that we maintain the relevance of the policy moving forwards. We've then got some set questions for our panelists, which have been pulled together from many of the questions and the comments and the feedback that we've already received. And then at towards the end, and we'll try and keep as much time as we possibly can for this, we'll answer Q&As coming in from the group. So please do use the Q&A function at any point. If we don't answer it immediately, we will come round to it. So please don't feel like we're just ignoring questions, and that isn't the case at all. So at this point, Danny, I'm going to hand over to yourself to talk around the policy and perhaps, I suppose, tell the story of where it was born from.
Thanks very much, Phil. And it's absolutely lovely to see everybody in the chat. I can't believe the length and breadth of the country, I think, and wider we've got joining us today in different roles and different locations. It's absolutely fabulous. Thank you so much for giving up your time to come and talk about a subject that I've thoroughly enjoyed working on. My background, I'm born and bred in the sector, slightly different route. I came more from lifeguarding and coaching than I did from fitness instructor. I qualified in many different sports and being able to deliver in my route to being a PE teacher until I realised I didn't particularly like working with children that much, and that ended that version of that career. A couple of sports development roles later and working for the RLSS and then on to CIMSPA. I've been in a fabulous position to get to be part of the sector and continue working in it. In my spare time, I like to be an academic. So I've come through all of my education from doing degrees and masters in sports business, focusing on policy analysis. I am as geeky as I sound. This is as bad as it gets. I'm currently a student of my doctorate, where I'm looking at transdisciplinary, and again, that's having quite a significant policy lens. So in the middle of lockdown, we're thinking, right, what can we do? What hobbies can we start? Gardening? Shall I do a bit of learning music or learn a new language? No, I wanted to write a policy about sport and physical activity and working in the online environment. So how lucky was I to have such a fabulous hobby? And I'm absolutely positive the other panel members was as equally excited as me when we got in touch and said, do you think you can help? Can you contribute? Can you help fill this gap? So this is very much, a real fantastic opportunity for me, and delighted to see that so many people want to hear about it. A lot of what we were trying to do, this was driven by our members. CIMSPA leads by listening, and that's the most important thing that we could do at the start of lockdown, was understand that actually more people than ever were being active. They were being active more than what they would have done normally. We also see an increase from businesses needing to use the online environment for either just facilitating their customer needs or supporting their local communities, or for essential business purposes. So we knew there was an absolute appetite and demand. Our frequently asked questions to our membership team and on our social media platforms, there was so much around, What do I need to do for insurance? How can I get online safely? What do I need to consider when I'm delivering in this type of environment? And there were so many things that as we tried to look into it, we realised that there were pockets of good practice and advice there, particularly around insurance, but there was also gaps in what we were being asked from members as well. So a lot of our purpose and where we were trying to get to was to provide clarity. So let's help, let's give the sector some guidance, some support, let's defunk the myths and try and understand actually what it is that people should be delivering and being able to do to make sure they're delivering safely. That was our priority. It was just a fabulous opportunity to get in touch with many of the panel members and many, many more organisations and individuals that supported this project as well. They were all superbly helpful. Sue particularly, you know, I think she must have spent more time on the phone to me than she did anybody else for a couple of weeks in trying to understand what was available and what wasn't. So it's been a real team effort and real privilege to work as part of a collaborative team across the sector as well, and hopefully delivering on what our members in the wider sector were asking of us. So a lot of what we wanted to do as well was identify what's essential practice and what's nice to do. What do you need to be doing to make sure you're safe, and what's aspirational, what helps you improve your practice longer term, improving that professional standard that we're all trying to achieve. And, you know, our CIMSPA members and wider members of other organisations do such a fantastic job of already. Thank you, Phil, if you're okay to move across. So what we decided to do was take all of the questions that were being asked from our members and put as much as we possibly could do into the content of the policy. And for me, with my geeky policy head on, you know, policy is only as good as the advice that you get at the back of it. So we were very, very keen to try and provide as much guidance as we possibly could to explain the policy statements. So as you're looking at both the policy and the guidance, I do recommend, if you can do, read them hand in hand. If you're thinking, right, I've read this policy statement, I don't understand what it means, or does this apply in the way in which I think it does, have a look at the guidance section. That's really what we intended to do. There's also loads of support resources and different links out to different locations as well, where you'll find more information. So we really tried our best to listen to what was needed within the sector, the gaps and the current advice that was already there. Like I said, the insurance companies were absolutely fantastic for us. We established a legal and insurance group that now meets on a regular basis to continue to support further areas of work in this field and others. And they were massively supporting in what already existed in terms of best practice. So we were able to take a lot of that and include that as part of the overall picture as well from where we're getting to. Thank you, Phil. And then the next area for us was the must and should statements. So for us, you'll see throughout the policy and throughout the guidance, it refers to these two points. And they're really key in explaining what we're trying to achieve. Must is about saying this is the best practice in the sector. This is what as a minimum you should be looking to achieve. And generally non-compliance of it could affect your insurance if a claim was made. So that's where we're trying to make as much of an emphasis and recommendation. If you can do, must is you must be doing this. Do what you possibly can do to make sure you achieve this. Whereas should is with the intention of aspirational, where it's possible, where it's applicable, where it's reasonable for you to do so. Try doing this practice. It's going to be advantageous for you, whether it's from an insurance perspective, a safety perspective from your participants, or for yourselves as you're delivering as well. So one of the examples that we've put on the slide was within the policy itself. It talks around giving a written or a verbal disclaimer. So this is about being upfront with your intention of what the session's about. It's about talking about how your participants, you know, should be informing you if they've got any medical conditions, illnesses or disabilities that you need to be aware of to make sure you can deliver a high quality and safe environment for them within the practice. So that's something that we've asked you to do as a must. Because of the online environment, we're then explaining the guidance that a lot of this you could achieve by doing a suitability for participate. So you'd hear that as like a PARQ statement and completing one of them. Again, if you're doing a pre-recorded delivery and you don't know if it's publicly available, you don't know who's going to be doing that, you can't obtain that information. So it's where it's practical for you. And again, if you have got the ability to complete a PARQ, it's advantageous. It gives you more information about your participants. It means you can really cater your sessions to their needs as well. So that's the difference in where we're trying to get to with the must and should statements. And they're probably quite fundamental to understanding how the policy works and the guidance at its best. And I think that's probably it from me, Phil.
Brill, thank you, Danny. Just before we started this webinar, there was a few of us just on, and Danny was very briefly talking about the fact that this policy, or the work for this policy being developed, almost started last March. And obviously we're a good few months on from that point. I wondered if you could just talk about sort of the intention of how it's going to be now that the policy is out there, how we're going to make sure that that relevance is maintained and it continues to be up with the times. Yeah.
That's a great question. Thanks, Phil. Yeah, definitely. There's always a thing in policy with policy lag, is that the second you put it out to market, then is it potentially out of date? So we've always got to be conscious of that. And at CIMSPA, we do try to do this through really great consultation processes, engaging with members and checking for validity of what we're putting out there. And the intention with this policy was to do really quite a short turnaround, so that we knew that it would be launched and then we'll be reviewing it quite quickly. It's the first time we've done anything like this, so we're really, really keen with such a changing environment for everybody, and knowing the impact of how COVID is changing our world quickly as well. We want to make sure that we've got a short turnaround, that then we can start taking that feedback from our members and from the wider sector. So let's make sure it's still relevant, let's make sure it's current, and knowing that it can take a few months to create policy and guidance changes, we're just making sure we build that in as quickly as possible, and we've got our finger on the pulse from what our sector's asking us to deliver, to make sure we're supporting them to do their jobs, to serve their communities as well.
Brilliant. And just kind of, I suppose, to link in with that, is that we all know that since last March, such a massive element of the sector has transitioned to delivering online, to varying degrees. And just yesterday, we put out a poll just to I suppose get a bit of a feel and a pulse check on what's the intention of using virtual delivery moving forwards, even beyond the point of being able to meet face to face, or having and welcoming members back into facilities. And there was such a continued sort of desire to stick with it to some degree. 93% of all respondents said, I am going to continue virtual delivery to varying degrees, but therefore the need for this guidance and policy is absolutely there, and it's not going to go away. At this point, I'm going to stop sharing, and we're just going to move to questions to our panelists, so bear with me while we just do that. So Paul, I'm going to come to yourself first, if that's okay. So Paul, from AXA, could you share your perspective from an insurance angle, and perhaps why it's good for practitioners to be recording sessions?
Well, I think recording sessions from an insurer perspective is very much an ideal world. Number one, we probably realise that it can be impractical. I think also what we've seen, certainly, and this is not necessarily just with regards to online education or delivery, is that claims generally now appear a lot later than perhaps we saw a few years ago. We have several claims that have reappeared from 2017, sort of during the last couple of months. When being perfectly honest with you, the memory of the individuals involved, perhaps the employment of the individuals involved, etc., have long gone, and therefore actually trying to make that or being able to defend those claims on behalf of policyholders, i.e. instructors, etc., it makes life quite difficult. So certainly for me, when I was working through this policy with CIMSPA, and I've been working, within the advisory group for probably 3 years now. But obviously, the onset of COVID back in March last year really sort of brought this to the fore. So number one, even as insurers, we are learning what online delivery actually means. I learned my knowledge at 20 years. I've been underwriting sport and leisure. Insurance is not the most glamorous of industries to work in, but the sport and leisure, obviously has more interest than perhaps some. But certainly from an underwriter perspective, and I'm sure Andy will say this from an insurance broker perspective, we only learn from claims. So really part of our education is, rather than perhaps appearing draconian with our views, or perhaps policy clauses or whatever else. We learn very much from what happens, and really sort of part of our role, and particularly for myself, because I work in very much a global role. So we have significant exposure, which we learn from Australia and from Canada and sort of different approaches globally. Is very much to learn from those claims. And I think anybody picking up the policy, and I think if you get to page 9 of it, it probably looks incredibly straightforward, and it probably looks as though, well, you'd pick it up and say, well, that's obvious to me. But that retention of footage is very much from an insurer point of view, or certainly from a claims handler point of view, is gold, to be perfectly honest with you. Once we have that footage, that is really the first part, the first area that we can actually start the defence of the claim. And I think what's interesting from a claims perspective, we really don't get any sort of commonality with regards to the type of instructor. We can have instructors that have been instructing for 25 years. We can have people that are new to instruction, and it comes across an absolute multitude of sports as well. So no two claims are the same. What is the same is actually the delivery of the claim and the focus from a litigation point of view of the weaknesses that may have occurred either at the start of that session, during that session, or at the end. So I think if you look at the policy, when it sort of mentions the obvious as a participant, making sure that the area is right, that you're exercising in, that floor surfaces are correct, etc. Personally, I think it's probably stating the obvious, but it's incredibly difficult to get across how important stating the obvious is. If that first line of defence is not there, an insurer and a personal trainer, an instructor, a coach, whoever it may be, is incredibly on the back foot, and will probably go through a very long drawn-out process, not only of trying to really defend the way that they operate, but also to give themselves some credibility as to what they have been instructing. So very much we learn from claims. Now, certainly in the last few months, there hasn't been an explosion of claims from online delivery, but that doesn't really mean much at the moment. We're certainly seeing claims now appear sort of 2 to 3 years down the line. So whether we'll see that. So for me, it was very much about working with CIMSPA to get a policy in place. Number one, that's workable. I think the policy we put out there is ideal world, but certainly as much of it which can be adhered to, I can't stress enough. It really should be adhered to, and whilst it may look as though it's the basics, the obvious, it probably takes a minute or two of the session right at the start to actually deliver that message. But it will save a huge amount of pain further down the line, potentially.
Thank you very much for that. And I suppose, was this you may have already said this, was this the first time, even though you've been part of that advisory group for a few years, that you've been involved in the development of a sort of a single policy?
Yes, very much so, and really no focus towards online. Obviously what happened towards the start of last year really brought that to the fore. But I'm really conscious that I think insurance is probably tarnished with negative impact. But we've had so many claimants over the last 20 years that I've been directly involved with sport that are involved in serious litigation, and really having good defence alongside them, someone that's going to guide them through the process, will stop the sleepless nights. And it's one of those things, you look at an insurance policy, you buy it, you put it in the drawer, hopefully you don't hear again from anybody until it's renewal. But when something goes wrong, I think the peace of mind that it can bring, and also just having really sort of litigation professionals working with you on that, the peace of mind which it can give through that process is absolutely paramount. You know, we've had in the past, we've had instructors that, you know, have been worried that they were going to go to jail because they'd done something wrong, you know, not really understand that this isn't a criminal case that's being brought, etc. So it's guidance from top to bottom. And I think from an insurance perspective, what this guide really brings for us is just, if you can comply with this, fantastic. If you can comply with most of it, you know, perhaps you can't keep recordings for 2-3 years, etc. We understand that, you know, you can't record every session, etc. But if you can get into a routine of how you're going to deliver, what the content of that delivery is going to be, i.e., are you in a safe environment? You know, do you understand what is about to be delivered? Have you considered any disabilities that you may have, or any pre-existing medical conditions? It's a very simple one or 2 minute process, but it really can save a huge amount of aggravation further down the line.
Thank you so much for sharing that that perspective, Paul. Really appreciate that. So I'm going to switch across to Chris now, if that's okay. So again, you've been part of the development of this policy. UK Active are obviously very, I suppose, focused towards organisations and you know, facilities that work within the sector. But perhaps you can elaborate on why did we decide to make this more for the practitioner and not the organisation?
Yeah, absolutely, Phil. I think it's a really good question. I think the key thing is here that what you'll often find is that organisations will commonly have existing internal policies that meet the specific needs of their business, their customers, and obviously have been designed to align with things like their corporate insurance, licensing, GDPR requirements, etc. So I think the key thing is to remember that individual practitioners, the freelancers, the self-employed people out there, of which there are clearly thousands in our sector, they're the people who, coming into this kind of COVID situation and looking to that switch online, who simply don't necessarily have that underlying kind of knowledge, expertise and support from anywhere. And I think that's where the opportunity for CIMSPA to really focus in and support those people who were looking to continue to be able to deliver their services during such challenging times, you know, it was probably the obvious area to really kind of focus on. That said, I think that there is an opportunity for operators, employers to take a look at the policy and look for the key points in there and perhaps compare that to their existing policies. And see whether there's any best practice that they can start to pull across into how they operate. But yeah, I think that's the key thing. I think, you know, it was a real challenging crisis, and the decision was taken really at the time to support those people who were out there on their own, you know, really looking for the support.
Yeah, thank you for that, Chris. And again, one of the other comments we've had is around potential exclusion of those without a professional qualification, you know, perhaps linked in with your previous answer. But I wondered if you could just talk around that as well.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I've been working with CIMSPA now in various guises for probably the last 5 years or so. And ultimately, I think CIMSPA is there to support the development of a professional workforce, to promote the benefits of qualified and safe practitioners to the end user. And I think the other key thing that's clearly come out of this pandemic is that we really want to be recognised as a professional sector by the likes of the NHS going forward. And I think it's absolutely essential that we really focus on the development of policies that are going to support that ongoing professionalisation of our sector. I would assume that the majority of people who are out there working in our sector who are very passionate about upholding professionalism will be glad to hear that actually the policies are designed to protect them and almost set them apart from those who are out there perhaps not operating at the standards we would expect.
Brilliant. Absolutely something that we're all aspiring to do as we all professionalize more. How's it been collaboratively working with CIMSPA on this? You know, different organisations working in a sector, and there's been a lot of comment around actually, you know, one of the perhaps byproducts of COVID has been that as a sector, and I'm sure many other sectors, we've perhaps come together a little bit better. But what's it been like, you know, with multiple organisations in the room all working for a shared purpose?
Yeah, for me, I mean, it's been a really good process. Danny has led it extremely well, very professional. You know, for me, I think it has exactly been that. It's really been an opportunity for the various kind of sector bodies to come together for a shared purpose. I think we've seen that at sort of industry body level. I think we've seen that at operator level, whereby we've had big gyms working with independent gyms to really kind of come together and drive forward what this sector really stands for and what it can do. So yeah, for me, it's been a really good process. I think the bodies are all working more closely perhaps than ever before, and that therefore really sets the standard as to how things need to move forward. And I think that ultimately benefits the people that are working in the sector, it benefits the organisations in the sector, and obviously then it benefits the end user if we're all joined up and working together.
Absolutely. And you know, I know we've already spoken about this policy very specifically being targeted far more at the practitioner, not necessarily the organisation or the facility. But what, if any, sort of feedback or response have you had from many of UK Active's members around the policy?
Yeah, look, I think obviously there's different types of feedback that are coming in, and it's obviously only been out there publicly for a short while. So I think we'll continue to obviously listen to our members and share any feedback with CIMSPA. There's obviously been positive feedback, certainly from smaller independent operators, where this type of kind of guidance I think is really, really helpful for their workforce. I think there's probably some feedback to come out from our Standards and Legislation Committee that we're going to pass over to CIMSPA. And as Danny said at the start of the session, this is something that will be reviewed on an ongoing basis. I think April is the date, and we're nearly there already, which is amazing. So we're nearly at a point where it's ready to review, and that's how quick things can change. So I think the key thing is, as you said, CIMSPA are a listening organisation. UK Active will also listen to our members, as I'm sure Sue at EMD will as well, so that we can continue to feed that back in and ensure that the policy remains relevant and you know, meets the needs of practitioners first and foremost, but ultimately this may start to perhaps develop into something that is seen as perfectly suitable for operators and employers as well.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Chris, and yeah, thank you for sharing all of your thoughts there. Andy, I'm going to come to yourself next, if that's all right. I just wanted, first of all, for you to perhaps share on your experience of being part of the legal and insurance panel, and what it's been like collaboratively, again, working on this policy.
Cheers, Phil. From my point of view, I mean, first and foremost, I've really enjoyed being part of that group. There are, you know, we've got all different representatives from different parts of the sector, UK Active, EMD who are here, CIMSPA, UK Coaching, various different organisations from different parts who all bring their own unique perspective and their unique approach to the sector and what we're trying to achieve out of that. Adding to that as well, the likes of Paul, who's an underwriter from the insurer. I'm an insurance broker. We've got barristers, solicitors, other representatives from the sector on there, and the collaboration and the different opinions that have shaped this policy as we've developed it, I think have led to it being, as Paul said, something very simple but really practically useful as well. For me, it's always really important that insurance isn't seen as something that's trying to stop things happening. The idea behind insurance and risk management and all of that, it's not there to stop activity taking place. It's to try and help practitioners to do that activity in a way that's safe for them, safe for the people who are taking part, and also put them in a position where if something does go wrong, we're able to give them that peace of mind of knowing that they're protected, and then they're not going to be lying awake at night wondering what's going to happen or whether they're going to lose their house or anything like that. It's there to give them that support and that peace of mind. One of the main bits about the working group that we've had with having insurance and the sector talking together, is it's a real, and from my experience, it's the first way we've ever been able to have that insurance input before something's happened as opposed to afterwards, if that makes sense. So rather than the sector putting a policy in place and devising it and it being used, and then the insurers trying to work on the back of that in terms of what good practice looks like around keeping people safe, having that input as part of that working party meant that there were bits that went into the policy that really helped to put that at the center, and just to help embed the insurance sort of protection in the way that the activity was being delivered in the first place.
No, that's brilliant, and again, thank you for sharing your thoughts on that. I'm going to make up a word here, Andy, but does having a policy like this, does it improve the insurability of the people within the sector? You know, to know that we've got a policy and some guidance that has been contributed towards by insurers. Does it give confidence to you ourselves as practitioners in the sector? I think that is not a word, insurability, but hopefully you understand the sentiment.
Go with insurability. If it doesn't exist, it should. Let's put it that way. Absolutely, I think it does. Absolutely. And I mean, the policy and the guidance is, and this is a point that Paul made. When you read it, it's relatively simple and straightforward. And it's about doing for me, it's about doing the basics right. And it's about, if possible, recording that you've done the basics right, so that when the claim gets made 2-3 years down the line and everyone's forgotten what happened, we've potentially got some evidence that we can rely on, as much as anything, to wave in front of a claimant solicitor and say, well, no, we did do the right things. We did follow the best practice. And the allegations that you're making against the practitioner actually aren't really that founded in any fact, because we know what we did and we know that what we did was right. I think it's inevitable that following this guidance and following this policy as best as people can is inevitably going to make people a better insurance risk. For me, it's all about risk. Primarily, it's the risk of people being injured. It's the risk of the participants taking part hurting themselves, and following good policy guidance and following good practice like this fundamentally will hopefully stop people getting hurt. It will stop accidents from happening, and that's great, because if the accident doesn't happen, then there's no claim to come on the back of it anyway. That's the ideal. Inevitably, though, accidents do happen when anyone's doing any kind of physical activity, and what we want really through asking practitioners to follow this guidance as best they can is to put them in a position where we're able to defend them as strongly as we possibly can do when the worst happens, and when somebody does unfortunately get injured, if they decide that they do want to bring a claim against a personal trainer or a Pilates teacher or some other kind of practitioner who's been leading the session, as the insurer in Paul's position, he wants to be in as strong a position as he can do to be able to refute the allegations and defend it. So when we're looking at things like disclaimers, and I noticed earlier on there was one question that came up in the Q&A around risk assessments, and we should be doing risk assessments of everything that we do. When it comes down to its basics, a risk assessment is essentially a practitioner looking at what they're doing and deciding how they can do it safely, so they minimize the risk of someone getting hurt. From an actual risk assessment point of view, we're talking about documenting that. Now, that may just purely be a case of recording, noting that you've sent out the disclaimers to everybody, and then recording the session if you can do, so that you've got evidence of what happened. People are less likely to be injured if they're doing an activity that's appropriate for what they are. You know what you're doing, so you're appropriately qualified and trained, and they're doing it in a space where they've got enough room to be able to do it. That's kind of your risk assessment, and that's what the guidance is asking you to just check with people beforehand. Your risk assessment is, have you asked people to check that? And it genuinely really is as simple as that. It's not overly complicated, and there's none of this, as I say, is in there to try and stop people doing the activity. It's just about doing it safely. And if you document those little bits and pieces around what you are doing to keep people safe, that's then the defence that we can rely on, that makes it much easier for us and for the insurers to have you back when someone looks to make a claim against you. Hopefully with the news from this week, and with the opening up of gyms and leisure centres and various different facilities again, lots of people will go back to face-to-face training. What we're talking about here in a digital space is really just doing what you do face-to-face, but in an environment where you're not standing in the same room as people. It's not massively different. And we're working with the likes of UK Coaching and CIMSPA around developing digital mechanisms around how you deliver a disclaimer, for example, or how you get a digital PARQ in front of somebody so they can fill it in before you do the session with them. Those kind of innovations are going to keep coming in, but it's really just doing what you're doing online, doing what you're doing face to face, but in an online environment.
Brilliant, thank you, Andy. Sue, I'm going to come to yourself now. So EMD UK, the professional body for group exercise, how significant is this policy for group exercise as a whole?
It's been it is really significant, and it's been great to be a part of it. So thanks, Danny, because our world turned upside down, or did a 360 come March last year, where instructors were delivering face-to-face delivery and had never even contemplated going online before. And for them, it was where companies or operators would do part of this work for them. They were left going, what do I do? How do I do it? So by pulling this policy together, it provides them with templates of risk assessments. It gives them almost like the checklist of this is what you should and shouldn't be doing. And provides them with the guidance of what the base level should be at least, and to excel above that. And I think for us, especially this policy is really important, because we've gone from not wanting to go online to going online to now on demand. So, having the help with the insurance companies to look at, the disclaimer that comes up at the front, if you're doing on demand, or whether you do a PARQ, and how you talk to people, especially with the likes of people coming back from long COVID.
Thank you. And have you received much in the way of feedback? Again, Chris's point was we've only had this out for a couple of weeks, but we've certainly had quite a few comments and responses as CIMSPA. But I just wondered, in regards to EMD, what kind of response or comments have you had from your end?
Yeah, generally on a whole, a really good response. It's kind of people going, it's a welcome standard. Danny knows that we've had already, our as it has been throughout COVID, everyone is open to their feedback and pushing stuff back. There's a few areas of concern, but I think there was just really on wording, and I think Danny did a very good job at the beginning of ciphering must and should in some of the areas, because we read it first level, it's a must, and actually haven't said that it's not a must or a should. So going back to the 3-year keeping records was a large panic for a lot of people to start off with, because some of our instructors are delivering 15 to 20 classes, so storage for that would be a difficulty. So, but what's been really good, going back to what everyone else is saying, it's been such a unified effort that it's very free, open lines to be able to, we get the feedback, it goes straight back to you guys, so we can continuously adapt. So on the whole, though, really good positive feedback.
That's brilliant to hear. I just wondered if you could elaborate a little bit more on sort of the warm-ups and cool-downs as well, which are an essential part of a safe sport or physical activity session. But yeah, just in terms of what the guidance perhaps suggests, or what is reasonable for that.
I think you need to break these down into what type of delivery you're going into. Yes, everybody should be doing a warm-up and a cool-down related to the exercise they're about to undertake. So a warm-up for someone who's delivering online coaching for football is significantly different to the delivery of online classes. Even Pilates through to boxing is significantly different. But I think the biggest area we needed to cover was the on-demand, because instructors now are delivering this in demand, and there is many people out there who maybe aren't qualified or doing on demand and have just gone in going, right, join me for 5 minutes and jump on a HIIT session. So it's really important to address that even whatever you're delivering, if it's a quick session, for the injury perspective, you need to have the warm up and the cool down.
Brilliant. No, thank you. And there have been some comments that have already come in regarding recommendations for dealing with participants who have disclosed medical conditions, in that the policy states you should suggest they seek medical advice before continuing, and provide you with proof of that medical professional sort of advice or permission to continue with physical activity. I just wondered what your thoughts are around this as well.
Yeah, we've had those questions back from our workforce as well, and I don't know whether Paul and Andy can come in and help us with some of this as well. But as far as we're concerned, we've always recommended that you have PARQ. I think even more so in the evolution of being online, if you're doing face-to-face, you should be screening people at least to see what their previous histories have been and what their health, if there's any health issues that you need to deal with. Because at the end of the day, if you don't feel you have the skill set and the qualifications to cover you for that, should you be teaching them? So it's really always referring back to, if you're unsure, you need to speak to your insurance company to see if you're covered in order to deliver it to somebody. But PARQs were phased out, I think, quite a lot in a lot of leisure operators for a while. I think we're talking specifically here about online. And if you're doing live classes, you should be checking, and even for the fact of the one question, have you had COVID? You know, because it's that recovery of them as they're going through. So I think it's a difficult conversation. It's probably easier if they're sending the information back to you via a digital format now, because you can have that one-to-one. You know, previously as Group X, we would stand in front of them going, anyone got any injuries? You know, and then they'd all come back with all their ailments. So you turned it round to saying, anyone not got any injuries that I don't know about? But you have that, you still need to have that tech element of it at some point. So if it's doing online live classes, I would still recommend the PARQ. If you're doing on demand, you've got to have that disclaimer at the front.
Yeah, no, thank you. And it's such, you know, talking about risk, it's such an important aspect, because if you don't know someone's got a medical condition, you know, not had that conversation prior, then there is a huge risk there that something might go wrong, and you know, you've not taken the necessary steps. I just wondered, Paul or Andy, if you wanted to perhaps come in on this one as well.
Yeah, I think it's difficult really, because you know, in an ideal world, you know, you're thinking that the participant would be volunteering that they have an issue or a disability or whatever else, and you would think that would be enough. I can assure you it probably isn't, insofar as look really from a claims perspective. You know, when you look at the policy, I think really the main areas that need to be addressed is very much about knowing who your participant is, being an instructor that's got a recognised qualification is exactly where to start with this, but also to be sympathetic and to really explain the risks that if they want to participate, it could be that your guidance to them is that you're not entirely sure whether they are suitable to participate. But if you're recording or if you're acknowledging in some shape or form that you've had that discussion and you really left it to the participant to perhaps make their judgment, because I don't think many of us are medical experts, and certainly access to that kind of expertise over the last 11 months has been difficult anyway. So again, I think it's about being realistic throughout this process. So, you know, just really having that discussion with someone and actually recording, whether it be in paper format or video format or just notes, etc., that you have had that conversation. Even if you've left it up to the participant to make their own judgment in the end, you know, just having that conversation is really, you know, from our perspective and certainly from the instructor's perspective, probably the first line of defence.
Brilliant. Thank you for that. So I'm just now looking at the many questions that we've had in. So first of all, just a huge thank you for engaging in this session. Looking at the clock, I'm not sure whether we're going to have enough time to be able to filter through these. I think we've had Jess in the background working, scribbling away to respond to as many questions as she can, but I'm just going to select some of the questions looking down the Q&A box, and then just hopefully as a bit of reassurance, if your question doesn't happen to get answered now, please rest assured that we will be using these questions to build out the frequently asked question sort of component that's going to be there live on the website supporting this policy along with the guidance. So I'm looking at Danny's head and she was nodding a little bit. So I'm not just making things up. Your questions absolutely support us in being able to give the support and put this into easy digestible steps to make sense. So one of the questions, Paul, while I've got you, you spoke about some of the claims earlier on are taking sort of 3 years. Does this contradict with the recommendations around how long we should be keeping video records for?
Well, I think we insure a lot of gyms as well. So I've probably looked at this from a different perspective, and certainly more of the 24-hour unmanned type gym operations as well. I mean, really, my education in this area is that the actual cost to keep that footage is extraordinary at times, particularly if you've got a multitude of cameras covering a large area, as it were. So again, I think really in line with what this policy is, or the intention of this policy, we've got to be realistic. We can't have an organisation that's spending a substantial amount of their turnover just retaining footage just because of a might happen. Retention of footage, if you're aware there's an incident, then I think that's fairly obvious that that actual session should be retained, etc. But sometimes, and really probably the way the legal system's working now is that the delaying tactics, the patience, etc., just creates those holes at times, which can be exploited. So, yeah, look, CCTV. It sounds obvious. It's easy. I mean, there's other considerations about GDPR and making sure that you're retaining that footage in accordance with that with those policies as well. So again, look, I think from an insurance perspective, we're probably learning on that as well. And as this policy evolves, I'm sure you'll see some recognition of that coming in. But yeah, that's one of the main areas for us, is that if you can retain, great. At times we just have to be realistic about it. Yeah. And and I think also just from a one thing we haven't mentioned here is really about the reputational risk as well, whether it be for the sport or actually the entity that's providing the instruction.
Thank you very much for that, Paul. We've had quite a few questions around PARQs, and one I'm just looking at from Mitchell Smith. And I think, Andy, you spoke about sort of developing digital solutions to support practitioners. Do we intend on creating a digital signable version of the PARQ? And just making it far easier from a user perspective to kind of get the relevant information and get those, get it done in an official way, documented.
Absolutely. I mean, Sue, you mentioned before about the kind of almost the changing fashion with regard to PARQs, and some organisations use them less now than they did previously. Personally, I think they're a great way of just keeping a record of that information, and to the point of, you as a practitioner, you can deliver a better session, a better experience for your client if you know who they are and what they're trying to get out of it, and a safer session if you know about their pre-existing conditions. And they're quite often not going to volunteer information, but if you can ask them, then at least you've covered off that responsibility of inquiring. And if they tell you something, you've then got an obligation to act on what they're telling you. So you can't have someone disclose something in a PARQ and then just completely ignore it and carry on and deliver the session anyway. And I'm sure people don't do that. But the benefit of the PARQ to me is still there, it's collecting that information. But we're in a slightly different environment now. We're not all face-to-face. It's not something that you can necessarily go through on a piece of paper with, and just tick some boxes in front of somebody. And people don't necessarily want to do that anyway. And even on face-to-face sessions, if you've got an ability to send somebody a PARQ to their phone the day before so they can fill it in and send it back before the session, that's going to be really positive. As I said before, we are developing things like that. We've got something that we're about to launch with UK Coaching, and it'd be great to work with CIMSPA around getting those kind of technologies out to the practitioners, just to make this whole process again as simple as possible. It's the PARQ is that great evidence of, I can prove that I've asked the question, I can prove the information that I was given back. So it's great from that point of view. And yes, absolutely, we're digitizing it.
On the same topic of PARQ, we've got a question from Bex Townley. Would you be able to clarify what constitutes a valid PARQ from an insurance perspective, in terms of collecting that information, in an official capacity?
I think the answer is probably no. I'm not sure I can, to be honest. There are templates for PARQs. I know different organisations have got different templates of the kind of information that needs to be provided. Again, we as an industry, I like to think we're very good at insurance, but we're not physical education practitioners. We're not physical trainers, and it's not necessarily the insurance industry's job to tell people what information they should be collecting. It's about being reasonable and relevant, I think, as much as anything. Asking those questions that you need to ask in order to make sure you can deliver a safe session that's appropriate for the person that you're working with, and rely on the kind of the guidance that CIMSPA provide and EMD and the various different organisations who've looked into what this best practice looks like in a lot of depth and have got advice to give. From an insurance point of view, it always comes down to the idea of what's reasonable and practicable, really, and it's that idea of if somebody came to me and said, what is a valid PARQ, and is this a valid PARQ, as in the one that has been templated by CIMSPA or EMD or UK Coaching or someone like that, as an industry, we're not going to say that that's not valid, because you as organisations know this better than we do. So I'd rely on the information that's out there and from the experts, really.
And thank you, Andy. I'm very conscious that we've actually got to 3 o'clock, and there's still so many questions. In fact, 54 open questions. I have been desperately scanning them, trying to sort of link together themes. I'm going to answer 2 more questions, and as I say, any other questions, we will absolutely use them to develop the FAQ. So Danny, I'm going to come to yourself with this question. So Jackie Hobbs has asked, in relation to any challenges to the competency of the policy holder, how significant is the instructor or PT or practitioner's record of CPD? Just put you on the spot with that one.
Thanks, Phil. No, it's a great question. Thank you for asking it. So a lot of this, with CIMSPA membership, CPD is a requirement of being a CIMSPA member. It's about improving your professional practice. It's about making sure you're up to date with any current changes to your practice, to legislation, or to anything else that might be going on. And a lot of that is, based internally from our governance perspective. That's part of our code of conduct. So it's part of making sure that we are up to date and we're as up to practice standards as we possibly can do. And again, that would be hopefully part of where we would see that insurance, is that if things had changed and you'd updated via CPD, is that it would still be valid. Whereas if we're missing out on best practice, that's where, again, it's just you're leaving yourself more vulnerable. And back to what Andy and Paul have been advising all the way through this, it's about looking from the risk perspective as well, is what's the risk of not updating my qualifications and my standards and where I need to be. So we would absolutely always encourage CPD's brilliant practice. this, as is maintaining your qualifications and your standards. This is going to vary whether you're from coaching to fitness instructing to lifeguarding. There's all sorts of different things that make an impact on that. So definitely try and stick within your parameters of where you get your membership and your guidance from, as well as your insurance.
Well, thank you.
Can I just add one point to that as well? In terms of, if somebody does get injured in a class, one of the allegations that's often going to be made against the practitioner is that they weren't competent to deliver that class. And having qualifications and having up-to-date CPD is a fantastic way of dismissing that and actually proving that you are competent and you are delivering classes that are appropriate to your ability and your training.
And we've had a final question that I'm going to just pose, and I'll start with yourself, Andy, if that's all right. But it's from an anonymous attendee, so I'm not sure who's asked the question. To improve and promote a professional standard, do the panel think those instructors who don't have a recognised qualification, should they not be offered insurance and allowed to deliver classes? As doctors, dentists, etc., wouldn't be allowed to practice without being qualified. I'll just get your perspective on this, Andy, and perhaps any of the other panelists, if you've got any thoughts around this question, which kind of links to, I suppose, regulation to some degree. But yeah, it'd be good to get your thoughts.
When we're looking to provide an insurance policy for somebody, when we're looking to arrange an insurance policy for somebody, one of the questions that the insurers are keenest to understand is how the risk is being managed, and to that extent, is it being delivered by somebody who knows what they're doing? And that's a fundamental thing to whether it's a risk that the insurers are prepared to accept on their books. Qualification is without question the easiest and most comprehensive way of evidencing that. From our point of view, personally, within our business, we would be very, very loath, I think, to arrange insurance cover for a fitness professional who isn't qualified, on the basis of on that basis, there's nothing to stop me turning up and taking out a policy so that I can be insured to deliver Pilates, which I've never done in my life. But if I've got a qualification to do it, then it can be reasonably assumed by the insurer that the person who's doing it knows what they're talking about. So we would generally not work with or not arrange cover for anybody who isn't qualified. Whether it comes down to how far it goes with regards to regulation isn't necessarily something that we would look to dictate, but I think we need to understand that the people who are delivering the activity are doing it in a capable and competent way, and qualification is the best way to identify that.
Thank you, Andy. And any other thoughts from any of the other panelists on that particular point around whether or not insurance should be available for people without the professional qualification?
Just really to follow up, obviously from an insurer perspective, it's the first thing we look for, qualification. I think really the allowances that we may have is a clear CV and long history in delivering that sport. I think you get also, realistically, you get some challenges with perhaps after school coaching with multi-sport activities. If they're providing 9 different activities, are they going to have a coach that's qualified in each one of them? I think sometimes we need to be realistic about that. But again, I think it's the first point of weakness, certainly with a claim. If someone is not qualified to deliver that activity, then we're very much on the back foot. So again, it's something that we really look for.
Brilliant. Thank you, Paul. Again, thank you for bearing with us. We have run over by a handful of minutes. Danny, I just wanted to come back to yourself, with any final comments you wanted to add in before we conclude this webinar.
Thanks, Phil. Yeah, absolutely. My first one is to say thank you to the panelists today. They've been fantastic. They've answered some brilliant questions from everybody that's engaged in the webinars. Thank you ever so much to everybody that's got involved today. I hope that everybody leaves this session today and they understand our intention. This was about getting the sector together, getting the insurance companies and the people that support our sector together to provide support and guidance to everybody working in this space, that we can continue to make improvements and improve the standards of our sector and be recognised for the good practice that we deliver. So I certainly hope that everybody walks away with that message. If you haven't found it already, the policy and the guidance are on the CIMSPA website. We'll make sure that they're publicly available and promoted again via all our usual channels. And if you have any questions, as Phil said, in abundance, please ask them. They continually inform our practice. We are reactive to what our sector needs and serving our membership. So please keep in contact with us. Tell us how you found the policy and we'll make sure that we make improvements and continue to build in this area from April. We're looking forward to it.
Brilliant. No, thank you very much. And thank you once again for joining us. Just as a final comment, you will, as part of attending this session, receive a follow-up email. That'll include a link to the recording of today's webinar, a link to the policy, as Danny mentioned, which is available on the website, and a link to a feedback form as well. We would love your comments and feedback on this webinar so that as we continue to deliver webinars, we can continue to improve them as well. So thank you once again for joining us today. Sorry we've run over, and thank you for all the great questions and comments. We've really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers, guys.